Independence 1960, and here we are now 2009, 1 year away from the 50th anniversary, and of that period a significant, far too long, has been spent under military rule. How much progress has been made from 1999 to 2009, and do other Africans look at Nigeria and say, yes, they're making progress 10 years on?
Well, no.
No,
for the simple reason that Nigeria, be it that because of their might, their numbers, 150 odd million, should have done far better.
Yes.
But in saying
look
that,
at that oil wealth.
Yes.
My
absolutely.
goodness.
But I'm not a fan of the oil wealth. I've always been on the understanding that with oil, you've got to have other resources that you've got to lean on. To be totally dependent, where you've got 99% of all your income coming from oil, being totally dependent on it is a worry, because you'll be hit when we've got fluctuations in the market, and when prices go down, and when in the case we've got in the Delta region at the moment, where 30% of the output of oil has been curtailed. Literally instantly. It hurts the government. But also, the rest of Africa looks at Nigeria and thinks, well, we thought you guys were a superpower. Clearly you're not. South Africa has taken that mantle. You are clearly a distant second. And maybe it may give Nigerians the appetite to do one better and hopefully supersede.
That and the fact that Obama has been to Cairo in Egypt, and he's going to Ghana next month, and he's bypassing Nigeria. I know some Nigerians are very, very hurt and feel insulted.
He's not going to Kenya.
Well, he's not going to Kenya, maybe
which
for
is his
similar reasons.
home route.
Yeah, but you know, the most populous nation, you'd think he would go to this, you know, good people, great country.
There is a reason. There is a reason.
We'll come to that reason in just a moment or two, but I want to focus on what Aya was saying there, just looking at oil, looking at the kinds of things that dog Nigeria's reputation, bad news abroad, unfortunately, much of it. Much of this is linked to corruption scams like the notorious 419 internet fishing expeditions, but others are, as I was saying, due to the oil industry, where there's been so much degradation of the environment, and of course the Shell case, which was finally concluded last week, as Claudia van der Puy reports.
It's the result family members never even imagined they could get. But today, Europe's largest oil firm, Shell, have agreed to a $15.5 million out-of-court settlement that ends a lawsuit against the company, claiming it was complicit in the executions of activists by Nigeria's former military regime. Activists that included Nigerian author Ben Saro-Wiwa. His son was one of the many relatives fighting for justice so that they could just move on from the pain surrounding their deaths.
It will provide some kind of psychological relief and release to have those who they feel were responsible for the violations of their human rights being held accountable, or being made to account for their roles in those human rights violations.
I'm thrilled about the settlement. I mean, it's been 13 years, and the clients are being well compensated. We're very pleased with the settlement.
Though Shell acknowledged no wrongdoing in the 1995 hangings of the activists, it agreed to settle the lawsuit, they said, with the hope of aiding the process of reconciliation.
But I think the message from this lawsuit and the others like it is that corporations, like individuals, must abide by internationally recognized human rights standards, and that they, just because what they're doing is not in the public eye, just because the victims are often poor or in an inaccessible place, they will be held accountable.
Half of the settlement will now go towards investment in social programs in Nigeria, where it's hoped the true cost of oil can change to a positive one.
Claudia van der Puy on last week's historic out-of-court settlement by Shell to the families of those Ogoni leaders killed back in 1995 by the Nigerian regime. Well, let's talk to Ben Amunwa from the Remember Saro-Wiwa campaign. Ben, good evening to you.
Evening, Henry.
Can you tell us a bit more about how the $15.5 million are going to be used?
Well, my understanding is that it will be used to, first of all, compensate the plaintiffs in this case. That is, the 10 individuals who brought this legal case against Shell. It wasn't only the Wiwa family, it was also relatives of the other Ogoni 9. And also it will be used for a trust, which is called the Kisi Foundation. Kisi in Ogoni means progress, moving forward. And essentially that's what the trust is all about. It's about providing education and community development in Ogoniland. And the board of trustees of that foundation will be independent of both Shell and the plaintiffs, and will be aiming to improve living conditions for Ogoni people. So $5 million of the 15.5 will be going towards that.
Did the campaign feel, well, look, actually, we shouldn't accept this money, we should let things go to court, we shouldn't be bought off by these people?
There's two separate things, Henry. There's the plaintiffs in the case, and then there's campaigners like myself and my colleagues. And essentially, you know, this settlement was a decision that was in favor of the plaintiffs. It was good for them. They chose to accept it, totally independently of us, and after exhausting debate, I imagine.
But they've admitted no liability, whereas you guys have pointed the finger at them and said that they contributed to the circumstances surrounding the deaths of the Ogoni Nine. They got off scot-free. OK, they've spent $15 million, but actually they say we were not responsible.
Well, I think if you look at the evidence, it's very clear, and we've been doing our best to publicize this evidence and put it out into the public realm, because although we haven't seen a trial before a jury, we are now seeing a trial in the public realm, which I think is as important. And let's remember that, you know, this case was only ever going to be a civil case where if Shell was found liable, they would have to pay damages. So essentially, either way, if Shell were found guilty or if they settled, they were just going to have to buy their way out of this. And of course, you know, 15.5 million is only, you know, 4 hours profit for a company that makes so much money. Of course, it's a drop in the ocean, but, you know, we know that Shell are guilty and are implicated in human rights abuses in Nigeria, not only in the 1990s, but, you know, ongoing today.
But they still deny that. What about Nigeria, the country itself, which last month launched another rebranding exercise that we've been talking about today? What about the lessons for them from this case? How much progress has Nigeria made on the question of oil, the environment, and crucially, the treatment of minorities?
I think Nigeria still has a very long way to go, and I think it's all tied in with this whole question of the meaning of democracy and participation in Nigeria. And I think, you know, as we've recently seen, whatever rebranding exercise is going on, I don't really know, but what I do know is that the rerun elections in Ekiti, you know, clearly demonstrate that, you know, Nigerians are denied their vote all over the shop, really, and there's still a very long way to go, and there's very, you know, deep concerns about, for instance, the 2011 general elections. And I think that, you know, this applies to not only minorities, but also to all Nigerians. But in a place like the Niger Delta, you know, ordinary people are so disenfranchised that the only way that they can make their political voice heard by these big entities like the federal government and the oil companies is unfortunately through armed resistance. And some people have chosen to pursue that means. Other people, Sarah Wiwa and his followers and people who are still pursuing that cause, are choosing the non-violent path. But, you know, I certainly think Nigeria has yet to adequately resolve the crisis in the Niger Delta, and it's certainly not going to be resolved through military means alone. It's a political problem, it's an environmental problem, it's a fundamental denial of human rights on a systematic basis. Until these problems, the problems that Ken Saro-Wiwa fought and died to address, until these problems are properly and adequately addressed by the federal government and the oil companies, we're not going to see a lasting peace.
All right, Ben Amunwa from the Remember Saro-Wiwa campaign, thank you very much for joining us on Shoot the Messenger this evening. Alistair Soyedi, did you breathe a sigh of relief when that settlement was arrived at between Shell and those families of the Ogoni Nine? Did you say to yourself, actually, now we can get on with really rebranding Nigeria, because that boil, the whole Ogoni, Niger Delta, Saro-Wiwa execution, murder some call it, has now been lanced?
Well, I think they're two separate cases, to be honest. There's no need to link the two together.
Really?
Absolutely true, and excited that, yes, there has been a case, and the case kind of has been settled, and that money has been given to the organization, which hopefully will utilize it towards the people of that region.
Yep.
But the rebranding, for me, as Alison was mentioning before, I don't think is something that we would say people are sweeping something under the carpet.